It's great to be here. Sorry I have to speak in English to you guys, but I see that's probably the language of your company anyway. So, a little bit about myself. I've worked in a lot of fun places and done a lot of fun things. At eBay, I was a senior director of engineering. At Intuit, I was a director of engineering. I led quality for the entire company. Everybody knows eBay, I'm sure. Intuit is the largest sort of small business and financial company in the United States. Ernst & Young, I spent a number of years running around Europe being a management consultant. IBM, Deutsche Bank, McDonnell Douglas, I was a CTO, and my last job, Capita, which is a British company that has about 70,000 people, I was actually at a conference at Steve McConnell's. You guys probably know the guy that Code Complete. Steve put me together with these Capita guys about a project that was about to be canceled, and so they convinced me to come over to Europe and help them. So listen, think for a minute about why we develop, why Agile has become so popular, right? The incremental delivery reduces risk. I sort of talk about it like, I'm talking to the choir here somewhat, but it's like if you get into a plane and you're going to fly from San Diego or from Boston to San Diego, it's going to take about 5 hours and 20 minutes, and you're going to fly at a magnetic heading of about 270 degrees. Imagine if the pilot set the heading at 270 degrees and went to sleep for 5 hours and 20 minutes and then lowered the gear. What's the probability that he's going to be anywhere near the San Diego airport? It's not very high, because there are things like wind and all kinds of other things, right? So Agile allows us to sort of look down at our instruments every couple minutes and sort of revector ourselves. So we know that, right? It lets the business quickly test new ideas. We ran about 400 experiments any day at eBay, and we would test them, and we would sometimes find out they were awesome, and sometimes we'd find out they really sucked, and we better get them down, right? It allows us to rapidly respond to changing environments, right? But Agile is how we achieve those outcomes. The business couldn't care less. The business doesn't care if we're Agile, if we're waterfall, if we are whatever we are. All they care about are we delivering with velocity and quality, right? That's all that they care about. So we're giving them what they want as fast as they want it. But we're never giving it to them as fast as they want it. That's just the reality of the business we're in, right? One of the things we do to make ourselves be able to meet the velocity and quality goals is we create what I think are relatively complex CI/CD environments that allow us to move as fast as we can and still not take too much risk in regards to quality. This is actually the CI/CD thing we built in my last job. It was an interesting one. As I was thinking about this presentation, it sort of came to mind to me. This is interesting because of this little thing over here, which I call ready for customers. And a lot of times you develop an Agile project and you don't have anything live yet, right? You don't have anything live yet. And when I got to Capita, they were doing what I would call serial waterfall, but they didn't have this customer mindset, and they were planning these big testing events, periodically. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, we're just not going to do that. And we know it doesn't work, right? So what we did is we set up an actual site, and we started to call it Ready for Customers. And even though we didn't have any customers on board yet, we opened it up to all the product people, and we said, we're going to put it there every day. When you say you're done with a feature, it's going to Ready for Customers. So powerful tools also bring a lot of risk if you're just going to throw things through. We used to regularly deploy hundreds of things a week to eBay.com, and we had to have the confidence that if we screwed up, we could roll them back really, really quick, and that was important. So it takes a lot more, though, than CI to get your velocity right. You have to really, really understand what the business expectations are, right? You really have to understand what the business expectations are. We were really, really Agile at eBay in every place except for one. We were Agile there, but there was one place where we couldn't deploy all the time live, and that was in the seller area, because the sellers would get really, really pissed off if anything changed. They'd get really, really pissed off if anything changed. So even though we executed Agile and we had, our effectively ready for sellers area, we couldn't go live with that unless we coordinated the big changes that we were making with them, right? You have to understand the risks you're willing to take. We would take a lot of risks, but not when it came to the search engine, right? Because when the search engine went down, the site was down. And when the site's down, that's really, really a problem. Planning, execution, and obviously continuous learning and improvement. I can't stress enough how important it is in all of these environments to stress to get your continuous learning and improvement. And most importantly is there's always a pressure to deliver faster. There's always an assumption that quality comes with it, and that isn't necessarily the case, right? And so it's important that you do velocity and quality. In fact, I put a process in place in my last job where if anyone on the leadership team that worked for me or my peers mentioned velocity in a sentence and failed to mention quality in the same sentence, it cost them a pound. They put a pound in the jar. And that worked, actually. It worked, and we were going to donate the money to charity until somebody, must have been one of the cleaners, actually figured out what we were doing and stole all the money in the picture. Couldn't believe it. How goddamn low can you go? We were going to give this to the King's Trust or something like that. Anyway, so this is a little meme somebody gave me. We deployed 20 new features today, Batman, yeah, but we rolled back 19 of them. So you have to be able to get everything right. It's a balance, and of course we know about that. So a little bit of context about quality strategy. First of all, the quality strategy is not a testing strategy, right? Testing strategies are one thing, quality strategies are very, very different. Because when you talk about a testing strategy, most people think about functional quality. They don't think about non-functional quality. The other thing that they don't generally think of is end-to-end. And when you get into the point of large websites where millions, literally millions of people are responsible for running those websites, you get in trouble if you don't think end-to-end. We had a situation at Intuit. In the United States, you have to file your taxes by midnight on the 15th of April. And we had quite an extensive back end that allowed people to file their taxes. And fortunately, I was not part of the tax group, by the way, at this time. And one night, on the last filing night, the system started to fall over. It fell over because an index on a database was corrupted, which is another long story. But it fell over, and you know what happens when people are nervous about not filing their taxes on time? They hit the button again. Exactly. You guys got it right? So the systems fell over, and Intuit got all this free advertising. Sort of. We were on the front page of all the papers, right, for saying Intuit systems fell over, right? We had to refund $18 million to our customers. We had to grovel to the Internal Revenue Service to say, please, guys, let our customers have 2 more days and don't fine them, right? So if you don't think end-to-end about all this stuff, you get in a lot of trouble. Actually, the most funny thing about that whole story was we had a VP of public relations. His name is Harry Fortsheimer. And the first quote that Harry provided the newspaper when he was asked, or it was a TV station, I'm not sure what it was, well, if people would file early, we wouldn't have had this problem. I was in a meeting with some other directors the next day, and we were on the campus up in Mountain View, and somebody said, "I wonder which rock Harry's hiding under today," because that's obviously not something you want to do. And I say this, it's an important thing I put in red. If your quality strategy is testing, then you really don't have a quality strategy, right? So, and I'm going to give you a real life example of something that actually happened to me. So I came into the office one day, December 7th or 8th, 2011, and this is what I saw. HP had announced they were going to sell 20,000 tablets at fire sale, a couple $100 off each. They were going to do it at exactly 4 p.m. Pacific time. They were going to do it on a Sunday, and it was 2 weeks before Christmas.
Oh boy.
We had 3 days to get ready. Yeah, fun stuff, huh, guys? And we only found out because somebody saw it on CNET. We would not have even known, right? If somebody hadn't gone on CNET. Now, the story was allegedly that somebody had accidentally leaked a memo. It was supposed to be a friends and family kind of thing, but they leaked it. That didn't help us much, right? And by the way, at this point in time, I was responsible for capacity planning for eBay. So I owned the allocation of servers to different functional areas in the data center. With about 80,000 servers, and I was in a lot of conference calls over this. But to be honest with you, we didn't panic. We really didn't panic because we knew what our risks were. We had done enough through our quality strategy work, end to end, to actually have identified what our risks were. We knew what the capacity was of our system. We could literally tell you how many transactions per second we could process across all of our data centers on any one of our 450 functions that we had up there. We knew where we needed to fix things. We knew how we needed to do it. And we had the right tools in place and lots of folks who knew the right tools. So, you really do want to give engineering teams a lot of freedom, but there are some areas you don't want to give engineering teams freedom in. And sometimes that's around allowing them to select their own tools, because when you do too much of that, you end up with, oh my God, Jim's the only guy who knows how to use that tool, and that's the only tool that works in this space, and we are, in colloquial English, we would say shit out of luck. We were prepared because we had really done a boatload of work to, up front, to understand exactly what our limits were and exactly where our vulnerabilities were. And that was all very much because we had done work around developing a quality strategy. And this quality strategy is end to end. And we talk about defects, and we talk about lots of different things in the work that we do as engineers. But the only thing that customer cares about is, does it do what I want, when I want it, as fast as I want it to be done? So from the customer's perspective, quality is a very different thing than when you sit down as an engineer and run a unit test or run a Selenium test or something, right? And until you get that in front of the user and you start to internalize that, it's difficult to really appreciate some of the complexity of doing it. I mean, it really is. And so this is really important. A quality strategy describes how you're going to organize and execute end-to-end to ensure your teams deliver quality that your customers deserve and the velocity of your business demands. That's what our job is as engineers and as developers. And by the way, I'm an engineer. I'm first an engineer. Here's an example of what I mean by quality. Have you guys ever seen a curve like this? So this comes out of the Six Sigma world, and it's talking about the optimum level of quality, and it really says we're not looking for perfection, right? We're only looking for the right level of quality for everything we do. For example, when we were doing our quality strategies at Intuit for TurboTax, we said, you know what? Where we're doing the tax calculations, the quality has to be really, really high. We can't risk any errors in tax calculations, because we've committed to the customers that if we make a mistake, we'll pay you fines. And when you have 56 million or 60 million or so people using your product to do their taxes, and you screw up on 60 million of them, even a wealthy company that's performing well can really be harmed. So it's about really breaking it down into what I call the cost of poor quality and the cost of quality. The cost of quality are the things that we invest to ensure that we have quality, and the cost of poor quality are all those things we get because of failures. So like the $18 million we had to give back to our customers because the TurboTax had fallen over. Those are clearly costs of poor quality. Bad net promoter scores, costs of poor quality, all those things fit in there. So, yeah, you have to be sure that you understand the right level. And the right level isn't always the same for every part of your product. We would regularly ship TurboTax knowing we could patch it. This was, back 10 years ago, before most of it had moved to the web. There's still more than half of it, though, is done on desktop because people don't want to think that their tax returns are being held out on the cloud. This cloud thing, we know what it is, right? But nobody else knows what it is. And believe it or not, there are people that actually think it's more vulnerable when it's sitting in a data center than it is when it's sitting on your PC. That's not true either. We know, right? Yeah. But the typical consumer who's saying, should I use software to do my taxes, or should I take out my pencil? Or should I go to a tax factory, right? So, I want to get a little bit into exactly what a quality strategy is. So, a quality strategy to develop one requires that you really understand your system, both how it's built and how it's going to be used, and both how you're building it from a functional level as well as how you're going to lay it out in the data center from a physical layer. So, I'll give you an example about, well, you also have to understand your KPIs. So this is the eBay. You've probably all used eBay, I'm guessing. This is what we used to call the lovable SRP, the search results page. If you were to go back 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and look at the eBay search results page, what you would have seen is lots of things. You've seen lots of things here. And now you see, only a few. You know why? Because we found out that clicks are money and above the fold is what counted. Right? We found we had a KPI about how fast we could put things across, or how fast we had to render above the fold. Yes, we did progressive rendering. Yes, we did all these other things, right? But we knew that 10 milliseconds cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in rendering above the fold. And we were relentless about that. Now that drove some really interesting requirements because we understood end to end what we needed to do in order to be able to render consistently above the fold within the number of milliseconds we had. Right? We could search 1 billion items. About 95% of the time we could search 1 billion items in between 50 and 70 milliseconds. If you ever want to talk about that architecture, I'm happy to do that. I was also responsible for the search engine architecture. So when we define a quality strategy, we want to do it at the start of the project because we're going to have to put things in place in order to ensure that we can actually meet the objectives. So you have to look at who's going to do what, where it is, and what tools you're going to do, and you have to look at it on at each of these phases what your objectives are going to do. Obviously, at this point, it's really hard to think about, I'm going to do my scalability testing, I'm going to do my characterization testing, maybe even do some characterization testing, but not really altogether too much. So we're going to look at things like the key user scenarios, the key user flows. What am I going to do at each level? What kinds of validations am I going to do? Tools, obviously. Release criteria. When am I ready to release? That's always a question. Am I willing to release with defects? What kind of defects am I willing to release with? Right? Staffing models. And finally, your live site modeling. Because your live site modeling has a big role on your ability to test. I'll give you an example about live site monitoring. How many people, when you validate, how many people, when you're developing software, do you think about, are my log files easily accessible with all the information I need to have in those log files? Right? And how easy is it going to be for an engineer who's not allowed into the production environment to get access to those log files? Okay? Those are things that have a material impact on your ability to rapidly respond to production incidents. And I don't give a damn how good you get, you are going to get production incidents. Okay? Nobody is going to tell me you're not going to have a production incident. You tell me it all you want. I'm going to bet against you. I just don't believe it's ever going to happen. Okay? So sometimes, this was controversial when I said it at the meeting, Sometimes your quality strategy might be to not have any testers at all. I actually sort of subscribe to that. I certainly say your quality strategy, you have a stronger quality approach if you don't have testers on your engineering team. Okay? I think they have a role post the engineering teams, but I don't think putting them on the engineering teams is a good idea because I think it creates an over the wall inside the team. Okay, so you have to understand your KPIs. What is going to make your users love your system? You know, at eBay we found that what made our users love our systems was that they were fast. You know, what's more important when you're on eBay than finding the things you're looking for and finding them fast, right? And obviously a nice checkout experience. So the first place we always start is by looking at the functional activities that we need to do. So this is sort of a logical view of a system. And it's a relatively easy thing to do. You basically draw yourself a context diagram, you figure out who your next neighbors are, and then you can figure out the points in which you're going to need to do inter-area validation. And I think at any point, it's pretty much around a next neighbor thing. So you don't want to, if there's somebody behind search, you don't want to worry about them if you're building my e-commerce system, as I call it there. You really want to focus primarily on the next neighbor. Now the next thing you need to do, and this is really the most difficult thing I think for us often as engineers to do, is to think about the physical model. Now I don't know how much you guys get involved in this with your customers, but when we would deploy at eBay, I would deploy across multiple data centers and across multiple VIPs, sometimes in a data center. I mean, we had, I don't know, something north of 700 servers that were allowing people to list their items on eBay. They were spread across multiple areas, multiple data centers, and multiple VIPs inside the data centers, and they were running on different types of hardware inside the data centers. It gets complex. And when you're developing your quality strategy, you sort of have to look at those things. You have to think about what are my fault domains and everything else. So understanding your HA, your DR, scalability, monitoring, and maintainability are all really, really important things that we typically, as engineers, don't think about when we sit down and write code and actually validate our code. VIPs, firewalls, multi-column. Yeah, and quality of service. Quality of service is really an interesting term, and I think it's an important term that we understand. Most times you hear people talk about availability, right? Everybody talks about uptime and availability. They are absolutely useless metrics. They're absolutely useless metrics. Absolutely useless. What counts is that the system is there when the user wants it, responding the way the user wants it to respond, as rapidly as the user wants it to respond. And that is a quality of service metric. It is not an availability or an uptime metric. I could take a data center offline at eBay, and I could still guarantee that my users were still getting the quality of service that they needed. All I care about is the users, and am I generating the revenue that I need to be generating? How many data centers I use doesn't really matter, right? It's not about uptime. And how do you measure uptime if you've got 700 or 800 servers performing the same function? Am I up as long as one of them is working? Clearly, you're operating in such a degraded mode that from the user's perspective, it doesn't really count. So quality of service is a really, really important concept for us to sort of internalize. This was amazing. We actually did some analysis. Functional defects leak a lot more to production than performance kinds of defects, at least when we had gotten to the point where we were really, really good at doing this shit. However, the performance defects that did leak were incredibly difficult to analyze and incredibly expensive to fix. Orders of magnitude more difficult sometimes to analyze. I recall a massive failure we had once at Intuit on a Monday morning. That was the first day of the month when all the small businesses, I think we had 10 million small businesses, ran their end of month accounting. And the systems kept falling over. Every time we bring them up, they'd fall over again. Every time we bring them up, they'd fall over again. We couldn't find out what was wrong. And finally, we were able to bring people on because everybody's out there nervous, right? Poking the buttons. And we found out that somehow, internally, there was a proxy server that was being called for all data center calls. So everything was going out to the proxy server. And and it was the proxy server that was falling over. And we didn't find it for 3 days, right? For 3 days. We had a similar failure at eBay when we started to migrate to mobile apps, right? And mobile apps are incredibly sensitive to poor response times on their services. And we had this one border router or VIP, external VIP, that we were seeing a number of calls that it just didn't make any sense when we looked at the number of transactions we were getting from mobile devices. And we found out that there were services inside of the data center that were going out and coming back in, right? It's just these things really do happen, and it's difficult to get them. So going back at each of the levels that you described, and I'm not saying there are 3, but generally there are 3. Certainly one of them is absolutely operations. You really, as part of your quality strategy, do want to go out and say, this is what I am going to do here, and this is what I'm going to do here, and this is what I'm going to do here, and this is how I'm going to do them, right? And if you get all of those things right, I think you'll be in relatively good shape. These are actual artifacts from some of the work that some of our quality strategy in some of our tests actually at eBay. Have you guys ever participated in a performance test on eBay? Have you used eBay?
Yes.
Well, then you may have. You may have, because one of the things that we did was everybody always says, and this came out of our quality discussions. How can we ensure quality of service, right? How can we ensure quality to the user? Because you talk about performance testing, and every organization that I've ever been to that does performance testing has told me one thing. Well, it's not the same as production, right? Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
It's not the same as production. And you know what? They're right. And you know what else? It's never going to be, right? But there are certain things you can do about characterization testing that you can do at your desktop, and that we dictated as part of our quality strategy. For example, you cannot obviously test the same performance on your developer machine that you can test on the live site. But you know what you can do? You can determine what are your constraining resources, right? You can run a type of a performance test on your desktop that isn't going to tell you the capacity you're going to get in the live site, but it is going to tell you whether you're constrained on memory or whether you're constrained on CPU, right? And you're always, when you run your characterization test, you're always going to find that there's an inflection point, and that the inflection point connects to the exhaustion of one resource or another. You're always going to find that. I mean, maybe not always, but every time I've ever done it, we did. So anyway, we said, this is done locally. We want to know our capacity. That was part of our objective. So what we did is we said, we're going to write some software, and we're going to use live user traffic to redirect additional, so you know how you run a load test, right? You ramp it up so many users over so many minutes. We did that by manipulating the APIs on the load balancer, so that everybody at eBay who's been trained in this product can log onto a website that I created, my team created, and they can just say, I want to run this performance test on this this particular SKU, actually, because there's different pieces of hardware. And we would just use actual user traffic to actually run our characterization tests in production. And when it hit, we had a rule that said 90% resource utilization was the maximum we were willing to accept. If it ever got over that, we put additional capacity on the pool. So what we did is we just said we are going to, we're going to limit when it hits 90% on it, because we won't ramp it up anymore. So that was really part of our quality strategy. So the most interesting quality strategy I ever learned of. Have you ever heard of this company?
Yeah.
Yeah? You've used Kayak? Well, the guys that started Kayak, one of the co-founders was a guy named Paul English, and Paul was an ex-Intuit guy. He used to work with our team in Boston. And Paul came back to Intuit and had a talk with some of us directors, and he said, my quality strategy is I don't have a call center. All the calls that come in go to the engineers. And as I'm the CTO, I'm on the rotation. How about that?
That will work.
Isn't that an interesting approach to quality? Right? I am going to personally feel the pain of what isn't right. So I thought that was a pretty interesting approach. Anyway, yeah. So oops. We had over 6 million users logged onto the system, all trying to buy those 20,000 tablets. It was, I won't say it was pretty. The whole event lasted about 15 minutes, and yes, we knew where our failures were going to be. We were right. One of the problems that we knew that we had and we literally couldn't fix was, if you think about eBay, you go on, you buy an item, right? But the items are always there. I mean, if you go into a supermarket or if you go into a store, with rare exceptions, do you ever find everybody trying to buy one thing at the same time? I mean, it doesn't happen in retail. And frankly, it had never happened at eBay before. So we knew, because of Oracle and the locking that had to be done to decrement a counter, that we could only decrement 40 times a second. And 20,000, 40, it isn't all that long if you get it all right. But there are other areas, and we actually we had a few failures, but we learned a lot, and it was pretty interesting. So I'll give you one more funny little anecdote about what we learned. All of eBay's data centers are in the United States because they have to be, because of the latency on the auction stuff. Even though only about 12 or 15% of eBay's stuff is actually auctioned anymore, we still have the problem with the auction. And so we had data centers in Vegas, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City. And one of the things that we had, I mentioned this earlier, we have a 90% requirement that if we lost the data center, none of our resources could ever be over 90%. So we had these 3 data centers. Data centers are huge, by the way, if you've ever been in one. Amazing places. It's not a rack. Believe me, it's not a rack. And the really scary part of a data center, all data centers basically run off batteries, right? They basically run off batteries because the power grid comes through the batteries, because batteries have to be there, even though you've got generators and stuff. The time it would take to go switch from something to a generator, from a power supply to a generator, your whole data center would have been down. So basically everything runs through batteries. So you walk in these rooms, they're huge, and I think they're somewhat explosive, to be honest with you. So wasn't my favorite place to hang around. Anyway, so we were always worried about the proverbial meteor coming through and taking out a data center. And so I actually had to run some tests as part of our ongoing quality practices to take out a data center and make sure that we still met this requirement. But also we did something else, and we had no cross-colo calls. You know what a cross-colo call is, right? So you have a service in this data center that needs something in this data center in order to work. So you wanted to catch those things in advance. you do certain stuff to make sure that you couldn't find it. We had sonar rules and stuff, but we didn't catch everything, and we would want to validate it anyway. So we did that. So one time we decided we're going to take this data center offline, and I came into the office the next morning, and Sissy Abraham, who was the director of the NOC, she ran the sort of operations center, she was ready to kill me because we'd had an accident. And it turns out we had a cross-colo call. And this cross-colo call, when we took one of the data centers offline, the service reached out to an image server that was in the other data center and didn't find it. And in the data center that was still online, the default image was a cow. And so we, because of this test we ran, we ended up showing our European users something over 2 million cows that night. Sissy was ready to kill me. Fortunately, our VP of operations is now the CTO of PayPal, Sri Shivananda. Sri thought it was a great success, and I tended to agree with Sri because.
How many cows did you sell?
Good question. I don't think we sell livestock on eBay, but it was really pretty funny. So listen, I think quality strategies are really important. However, they are not the proverbial eierlegende Wollmilchsau. Nuno said you guys are expanding into Berlin. That's an important word to know. Eierlegende Wollmilchsau. It is an animal that does absolutely everything. It lays eggs. It gives you wool. It's a pig. It gives you milk. Right? So, I hope you found this, interesting. If you'd like to reach out to me for anything, please feel free to do so. I'm always happy to chat. I am writing a book, but I also like to keep busy. So, listen, thanks a lot for your time. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have, and I'll answer any questions you guys have.